Welcome back to another edition of Components Breakdown. Today, we are going to take a look at the 2 to 6 player deduction and bluffing game called Letters from Whitechapel, which centers around one of the world's most infamous and unidentified serial killers of all time, known simply as Jack the Ripper. In Letters from Whitechapel, 5 detectives that were important to the original investigation must join together and cooperate their movements and strategies effectively in order to hunt down and discover Jack's trail by following clues to the tangled streets and back alleys of the Whitechapel district of London in hopes of making an eventual arrest. All the while, one player employs the role of Jack himself, enacting his vengeance and ruthless violence against his victims before he can be cornered and caught by his pursuers. Letters from Whitechapel depicts a very macabre setting that is now well over a century old, making its thematic backdrop just a bit easier to swallow and partake in for its participants. Fans of deduction and semi-cooperative games should also feel right at home with this title, and will most definitely find numerous aspects of its gameplay to appreciate, especially its simplistic mechanics and ease of play. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the components and setup of the game. Letters from Whitechapel is one of the easier deduction-style games to teach and play, which is due in part to not only the game's simple-to-understand mechanics, but also to the very limited amount of component types that are used within the game. First is the game board, which contains 199 total circles that are linked together by dotted lines. These circles will comprise the areas of movement that Jack will stealthily move through over the course of 4 nights. Players will also notice dozens of black squares, which also litter the landscape of the Whitechapel district. These are called crossings, and are the spots on the game board in which the 5 cooperating police detectives will travel during their hunt for Jack. At the start of the game, one player will take on the role of Jack the Ripper, while the other players become the police detectives. The players will then distribute the 5 policeman pawns and corresponding police sheets among themselves in any which way that they can agree upon. And it should be noted that all 5 policeman tokens are used no matter how many players are participating in the game. So if there are fewer than 6 total players, someone must control more than 1 policeman at any given time. The Jack player will then take a fresh move track from the provided pad and place it in his player screen. This sheet will allow the Jack player to track each of his movements through all 4 possible nights of the game. After doing so, he will then place one of his black Jack the Ripper pawns on the first night of the game board's night track. This pawn will signify the elapsing nights as the game progresses. Jack will then secretly choose his hideout for the entirety of the game. The hideout acts as the single location on the game board that Jack calls home, and must safely return to after each of the 4 nights' murders. Now this is a very important moment of the setup, and one of the most central mechanics of the game, since everything that is done moving forward from this point will revolve around Jack's ability to return back safely to this exact same location each of the game's 4 nights, as well as the detective's abilities to deduce through time where this exact location is, so that they can either cordon off, corner, and eventually prevent Jack from making his escape back. When choosing a hideout, Jack must choose any numbered circle on the game board, except for the 8 red numbered circles. Now, when he's chosen his final hideout, the player will then record that number on the move track sheet in the prominent oval at the top of the sheet. Again, Jack's goal will always be to return to this hideout after each murder without being arrested or trapped by the police detectives. After this is completed, Jack will then collect the 5 red crime scene tokens, the 19 transparent clue tokens, the 8 white women tokens, the 3 coach and 2 alley special movement tokens, as well as the 1 red time of the crime token, all of which will be explained a little further into this video. The players will then shuffle the 5 color-coded head of the investigation tiles and place them face down in random order on the provided space of the game board. These tiles will determine which of the 5 possible investigators will be making the final decision for the group during each of the game's 4 nights. Finally, the police detective players will collect the 5 white wretched pawns and the 7 black police patrol tokens, again, both of which will be explained as we get further into this video. A game of Letters from Whitechapel is divided into 4 distinct nights, which mirror the dates and murders from the actual historical events that occurred in London in the year 1888. Each of these nights is divided into 2 separate parts, and each part is then composed of a number of different phases that will take place during that particular night. Now, at the start of the game, each of the players will be given a detailed player sheet that breaks down all 12 of these unique phases, with each phase naming either Jack the Ripper or the police as the responsible party for carrying out a particular set of activities for each of those phases. And although this may look very cumbersome and daunting at first, I can assure you that its look is far more deceiving than its actual reality. Let's use the natural break of Part 1 and Part 2 of a night to showcase each of these different parts individually. Part 1 of a night is entitled Hell and is comprised of 9 total phases. Now, in a nutshell, Hell constitutes the cat and mouse game that Jack plays with the police and his victims up to and including the exact moment or time that he decides to enact a murder. Phase 1, Preparing the Scene. Jack will collect special movement tokens according to which night it currently is. And at the start of the game on the first night, Jack will collect all 3 of the stagecoach tokens as well as the 2 alley tokens. Now, as the game progresses, Jack will have at his disposal fewer and fewer of these resources made available to him at the start of each night. So he'll have to make a conscious decision during later nights on when best to use these distinct and unique abilities. Phase 2. The targets are identified. Jack will now collect the women tokens according to which night it currently is. At the very start of the first night, Jack will begin with all 8 of the total available women tokens, 5 of which are marked as real women, and 3 of which are unmarked or considered fake targets. Now, thematically, as the nights progress in the game, Jack's total number of targets will diminish with each night, since fewer and fewer women decide to brave the streets in fear of his murders. Now, once he has these tokens in hand, he will secretly place all 8 of them face down on the red numbered circles of the game board, arranging them in any order that he so wishes. Now, the tokens that are marked in red on their faces represent Jack the Ripper's possible targets, while the white faces or blank ones represent fake targets, which he'll use to confuse or throw off the police detectives according to whichever strategy he decides to adopt. Remember, the faces of these tokens will remain hidden as Jack places them face down, so that Jack is the only person that knows where the possible real targets are located. Phase 3. Patrolling the streets. We now move to our first detective turn, in which the players turn over the top tile of the head of the investigation pile, with the player controlling the policeman of the corresponding color that is shown being named the head of the investigation for the current night. Now, the head of the investigation is simply a namesake, but it also ultimately determines who in that group makes the final decisions for the group when they cannot decide as a unit on how to investigate or how to move cohesively together towards a specific objective. On the first night of the game, the head of the investigation will also secretly place all 7 of the police patrol tokens face down on the yellow bordered crossings in any arrangement that he or she so wishes to do so. Now, just like Jack's women tokens, the police patrol tokens have 5 faces that are marked with each of the 5 collars of the police detective pawns. However, 2 tokens are completely black and are likewise considered fake patrols, which are again used to confuse Jack this time according to whatever strategy that the head of the investigation decides to use for this night. And again, please remember, the faces of these tokens are likewise to remain hidden from Jack this time at all costs. Phase 4. The victims are chosen. At this point, all the women tokens will now be turned face up and revealed, with those that are marked as red being replaced with the wretched pawns, while those that are unmarked simply being removed from the game board. Also during this phase, the red time of the crime token is placed on the yellow Roman numeral 1 of the move track, which is located across the bottom of the game board. This move track will ultimately depict how much time or allotments of movement that Jack is allowed during this particular night to kill his victim and then get back to his hideout. Phase 5. blood on the streets. Now Jack must decide whether to kill one of the available wretched targets that have been revealed, or to patiently wait just a little while longer until the timing better suits his objectives. Now, it needs to be pointed out that if the time of the crime marker ever should reach the Roman numeral 5, then Jack can wait no longer and must make a kill during this phase. And I'll explain how this moves in just a moment. Now, two things are going to happen during this phase. First, Jack can decide to make his kill by selecting one of those 5 wretched pawns in the game board and replacing it with a red crime scene token. Now, if this is done, then the wretched pawn and one of the red marked women tokens are permanently removed from the game since they are both now dead. Jack has now made his first kill of the game, and by doing this at this current location on the game board, where he is will be revealed to all the players. Play will now continue and skip to phase 8, skipping both phases 6 and 7 if this should happen. Now, if Jack decides not to kill a victim in favor of waiting a few rounds, then the night continues on to the next phase. Phase 6, Suspense grows. If Jack decides not to immediately make a kill, then the time of the crime token would then be moved to the next yellow Roman numeral in ascending order, so it would move to number 2. This is then followed up by the head of the investigation being required to move each of the wretched pawns to one available adjacent location. However, these pawns cannot end their movement adjacent to a police patrol token, nor can they cross a police patrol token during their movements. Now, this phase effectively allows Jack a little more time to get some distance between the wretched pawns and the police patrol tokens so that he can make a kill and have some initial space to work with, and becomes a more crucial step in the game as the nights progress and you get deeper into the game. Phase 7, Ready to Kill. Since Jack the Ripper spent some time patiently waiting and examining surroundings, he now has the luxury of choosing one of the police patrol tokens and revealing it by turning it face up. If the token is a fake patrol, then it is simply removed from the game board. Otherwise, it simply remains on the board so that Jack will know where that particularly colored detective will start his turn. Again, this is kind of, these two phases, phase 6 and phase 7, are kind of a cat and mouse game that Jack can play with both his victims and the detectives to allow him just a little more space to make his kill and escape afterwards. Now, after this phase 7 is complete, play continues back with phase 7, repeating these 3 phases, 5, 6, 7, over and over until either Jack runs out of time to kill, or he simply picks a target and enacts his terror. Phase 8, Corpse on the Sidewalk. Now, once Jack actually picks his target and kills his victim, he's going to use a pencil to record the corresponding Roman numeral currently marked by the time of the crime token, and on the row corresponding to the current night. So basically, he is recording where that crime took place. So now Jack is actually located at that numbered circle on the game board. And for the rest of the night, he will be moving between numbered circles, trying to get back to his hideout without being caught. Now, to prepare for the second part of the night, or the second part of the game, Jack will place the second black Jack the Ripper pawn on the game board move track on the exact same space that is currently marked by the time of the crime counter. This Jack pawn will be used to keep track of Jack's moves while he attempts to escape into the city. Phase 9, Alarm Whistles. The final phase in part 1 of the night reveals all of the police patrol tokens that have not yet been revealed by Jack himself. These color-coded patrol tokens are then replaced with the corresponding policeman pawns, with additional fake patrols simply being removed from the game board. The detectives will also remove from the board any wretched pawns that are still in play and were not killed. We are now ready for part 2 of the first night. Part 2 is entitled The Hunting and is comprised of only 3 total phases this time, but it constitutes the majority of the game's mechanics and strategic flow. Now, it is during this part of the game that Jack will methodically make his way back to the safety of his hideout, while the detectives will try to create a net over the district in hopes of either picking up a trail of clues or making an arrest. Phase 1, Escape in the Night. Now it is during this phase that Jack is allowed to move from his current numbered circle to an adjacent numbered circle, following the dotted lines as he goes. However, he may not move over a crossing that is occupied by a policeman pawn. Jack always plots his moves secretly by noting his destination circle on the sheet, on the hidden sheet, in the next available space to the right of his current location, after which he must move the black Jack pawn one space rightward on the game's move track. Now this will give players an idea on how many spaces he moves and how many spaces he is away from his original crime. It is also during this phase that Jack may utilize any one of his finite special movement tokens, being either the coach or the alley. The coach allows Jack to move 2 spaces during one turn, both of which are likewise recorded on his movement sheet, followed by moving the Jack pawn 2 spaces to denote the extra movements. The alley, on the other hand, allows Jack to cross an entire block of houses, moving from one numbered circle on that block's perimeter to any other numbered circle on that same block's perimeter. Again, when Jack uses one of these tokens, he records the movement on his sheet and places the token on the track to denote where and what time that token was used. Phase 2. Hunting the monster. After consulting each of the other players, the detectives may then move their policeman pawns, starting with the head of the investigation and moving clockwise around the table afterwards. Policeman pawn also move along the dotted lines. However, they are allowed to move up to a distance of 2 total crossings, ignoring all the numbered circles that they pass, giving them a little bit more initial mobility than the Jack the Ripper player. Policeman pawns may also move through each other, however, they may not occupy the same space once they finish their movement. Phase 3. Clues and Suspicion. This phase is the most important mechanical feature of the detective's turn during the game and allows them 2 very distinct actions to take within the game. And these are looking for clues and executing an arrest. Both of these types of actions can be undertaken in the numbered circles that are directly adjacent to that player's policeman pawn, and each policeman pawn can execute only one of these 2 actions during their turn. So it's imperative to choose as a group when and where to enact these specific actions and by which players. To look for clues, which is the first available action, the detective player will announce the number of a directly adjacent numbered circle that he wishes to inspect for clues. The Jack player will then check to see if that numbered circle appears anywhere on a sheet in that current knight's row. Now, if it does, then that Jack player will have to place a transparent clue token on the numbered circle and that player's turn ends. Now, what this does is it effectively allows the police patrols to find out where Jack has been through the night. Now, if the number does not appear on Jack's sheet, then the detective can announce another number that is directly adjacent to his location. And he can repeat this process numerous times until either a clue token is placed or no more adjacent circles remain to be inspected. Now, if the player decides to forego searching for clues by making an arrest instead, then he takes the second action. Now, by making an arrest, the detective announces the number of one and only one adjacent circle that is next to his location. Now, if that location is revealed to be Jack's current location, then Jack is immediately arrested and he loses the game. Now, if that same announced number is not Jack's current location, then no further investigations may take place for that player during that turn. So basically, making an arrest is a one-time action, so one time and you're done. Now that you have a basic understanding of how Part 2 works, these 3 phases will continue and repeat until either the Jack player is cornered and can make no legal moves, he is arrested, or he fails to make it to his hideout in the allotted number of movements that are allowed on the board's movement track. Now, if Jack does make it through the first night of the game by escaping his captors and returning safely back to his hideout, then a new night begins with a new murder and also some possible smaller sets of rules that will be introduced. However, the same basic rules and phases will always apply on each of the game's night, with Jack trying desperately to escape the enclosing net of clues and suspicions of the detective group. Now there are some smaller sets of additional components that I did not introduce during this video, including a variant that provides Jack with false clue tokens that can lead the police astray, as well as letters that can be used to sort of trip up the detective's initial plans. However, from the base game alone, Letters from Whitechapel stands on its own merits by providing a gameplay experience that is both very mechanically solid and incredibly tense to partake in. What initially looks to be just a little bit confusing and convoluted at first glance, especially when you look at all those different phases, really breaks down into a very thematic experience that is incredibly easy to teach, but very difficult to ever really master. And this is due to the very nature of the game, as each player will almost always approach the game just a little bit differently. Not only on how they move and hijack covertly across the board, but also how they cooperate as a team and deduce his movements by playing on the other side of the law as the detectives. In truth, most of my all-time favorite moments or snapshots of gaming in my past have come from deduction-style games, including ones like Lord of the Rings: The Confrontation, Fury of Dracula, and Battlestar Galactica, all of which are sort of the heavy hitters in the industry. Now, these are the kinds of games that foster a very special kind of communication intelligence level that, when combined with the right set of players, are incredibly difficult to ever really forget because they are so engaging to play. In essence, Letters from Whitechapel delivers that same robust and meaty experience, but in a game that is much quicker to play and far easier to introduce. And it does this by stripping the game of cards and combat and all those other things that are mostly enjoyable in those other previously mentioned games, but tend to kind of bog down the overall experience. And that experience, to me, is to really throw players into an environment and provide them with just enough tools to deliver the intended gameplay experience without having to overburden them with a large amount of rules or mechanics or components. And this is why Letters from Whitechapel excels for me on so many different levels. At its heart, it's just a very simple game of deduction that is done in such a way that makes it accessible to almost everybody. The young, old, male, female, novice, or even highly experienced gamers. And by keeping it approachable, it means that it will almost certainly appeal to even the most jaded of gamers. Letters from Whitechapel is just an exceptionally well thought out game, one that can last several hours or end very abruptly in just 30 minutes of time, all of which ultimately depends on the level of intelligence on both sides of the game, and that's really what deduction games should always strive to create for its players. An atmosphere that puts intelligence and logical decisions before a grandiose set of components and rules. This is why I personally believe it's important for fans of this genre to give this game a real shot, because it accomplishes everything that it sets out to deliver in one of the most simple packages yet in a deduction style game. Yet it retains that overall feeling of depth and cooperation and heavy strategic intelligence despite being backed by a much smaller component lineup. This is definitely one of my favorite games of 2011. So that is Letters from Whitechapel. I am Jeremy Salinas, and thank you very much for watching.